Well, welcome to first of these coffee break times together. They're not intended to be hugely professional or slick in their presentation. It's really just an opportunity just to connect together over a cup of coffee. I'm going to try and produce these perhaps weekly or as near to weekly as I can, just to really talk through some issues to do with leadership or aspiring leadership, sort of coaching, mentoring stuff, things that might be perhaps of help that we can dig into together and consider, what we might learn together. The first one of those that I've felt quite stirred about recently is just the whole thing of culture in church life. I think it's a really big deal, actually. And one of the verses that Paul says to Timothy, which is really, I think, a really telling one, is in 1 Corinthians 14:7. He says, "That is why I sent you Timothy, my beloved and faithful child in the Lord, to remind you of my ways in Christ as I teach them everywhere in every church." And I think what Paul is getting at there is not so much doctrine, although obviously, he was concerned about that and he commented on that in many places, and not so much structure or how meetings should be conducted, those sorts of things. I think he's talking about something a bit more intangible here. I think he's talking about the flavour, the style, the atmosphere. I think he's talking about cultural things, teaching someone my ways, the ways we do things. So each church has got a culture, each eldership has got a culture, each person has grown up in a culture and is formed by a culture and shaped by a culture. And the culture we set in church life is really important. And Paul was able to send Timothy saying to him, he'll remind you of my ways, meaning he's got the same kind of values as me, he's got the same atmosphere about him, there's the same DNA. Cultural things are really important in church life because, for example, you can have an eldership, but how does that eldership function? Is it very kind of agenda-driven and strategy-driven? Or does it place high emphasis on relationship and brotherliness, vulnerability, openness, or is it very much more about gift mix and that kind of stuff? All of those things are good, but there is a feel, there is a flavour to how we do things that I think is really important. I think it was important enough for Paul to feel he wanted to send Timothy to the church there in Corinth to reinforce a culture. Now, most culture change experts say that it takes between 5 and 7 years to actually form or reform a culture in any organisation. So cultural things are not quick fixes. They're not something you can go to a conference about and learn a technique or read a book and pass it around the team. They've got to be embodied. They've got to be lived out. It's to do with who we are, how we live, what things are important to us. And those cultural things, I think, are probably in the end more important than what we do in terms of church strategy or ministry outworking. Obviously, you've got to be relevant in what we do and obedient to the prophetic, but how we do it, that kind of flavour, what does it feel like? What's the atmosphere around it? What is it that people feel when they come in amongst us and be amongst us? Those kind of cultural foundations, I think, are of crucial apostolic importance, which is why I think Paul comments about them. My ways, he will remind you of my ways. And I think Paul was very consistent in how he lived, very consistent in how he interplayed with people, how he interacted with people. He wasn't always popular. There were times when people didn't agree with him, but his way of behaving, his way of acting, his kind of the flavour, the manner with which he conducted himself was very consistent. And I think, therefore, his churches would have some kind of flavour that was heavily emphasised on the sort of things that were important to him. So over these next coffee breaks, I want to just explore one or two aspects of what makes a good church culture. What are some of the key ingredients for a good cultural flavour? And we'll just pick one each time. But what I'd perhaps suggest you do before we get into the next one is, between now and then, why don't you write down some key things that you feel are culturally important aspirations, either for your ministry or for the church that you're working in, or amongst the churches that we're connected in together. I think that'd be a really good place to start, and then we can perhaps explore those things together. You should be able to subscribe to these video blogs somewhere down there, under there. There'll be some buttons somewhere or other you can click to do that. So I'd encourage you, pass them around lots of people, trainee leaders, aspiring leaders, as well as existing leaders. Let's try and get some conversation going about these things, because I think this is a really interesting way just to do something across the internet, where geography is no distance, no object rather. And we'll have a go, see what works. So I'll see you next time on Coffee Break.